Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode on TMJ's Political Current podcast. It is now over 10 days following the ceasefire, or a halt in hostilities as many call it, between Iran and Israel following a 12-day war that started after Israel's attack on Iran, claiming that it was due to Iran's growing nuclear threat, a claim that Israel has been making for over 30 years now. Today, I'm joined by Professor Mohammad Marandi. He is a professor at the University of Tehran and also a former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team. He joins me today to break down the situation in Iran following the 12-day war and what to expect from Iranian leadership moving forward. Thank you again, Professor Marandi, for joining us again on TMJ News. And today we want to speak to you about a discussion that is right after just a little over 10 days since the ceasefire between Iran and Israel. And the first question I want to start off with is, what does the situation look like in Iran right now? How are people, including yourself, feeling about everything that happened?
It's not exactly a ceasefire. It is a halt in hostilities. The Iranians have not negotiated with anyone. The Iranians simply agreed to stop shooting if the Zionist regime stops. And the last 2-3 hours, as I'm sure you and your viewers recall, it was the Iranians that were firing missiles into cities in the Israeli regime until the last seconds of the fighting. I think in general, although it was painful, especially the first day, because this was a blitzkrieg attack, it was unprovoked, and the Israeli regime slaughtered many people. They targeted apartment blocks and killed many women and children. They murdered many senior military commanders, but they also murdered their neighbors and their families and their grandchildren. And in addition to that, I think it's quite clear that the Iranians were very upset that Takfiri elements in the country, ISIS, Al-Qaeda affiliates, among others, that they were cooperating with the Israeli regime in using drones to damage Iran's air defenses. But the country immediately regrouped. New commanders were chosen to lead the defense of the country. And I think it's fair to say that within a couple of days, the tide began to turn, and gradually things began to get worse for the Israeli regime. And by the time the fighting stopped, it was clear that Netanyahu was begging for a ceasefire or a halt in hostilities, and so was Trump. He was under a lot of pressure to save Israel, as Steve Bannon said after the fighting stopped. And Trump himself admitted that the regime took a major beating, especially during the last couple of days. So the mood in general in Iran is one of celebration, but painful as well because of the sheer number of innocent people who were murdered. The Israelis, of course, have shown that they have no red lines. And that, I think, was a critical mistake. Not only was the blitzkrieg attack a critical mistake, but so was the fact that it had no red lines, and the fact that the West supported the aggression. I think all of these together were huge mistakes, because what it did was that it united Iranians in a way in which I have not seen for well over 30 years. And Iranians in general they dislike Israel. They despise the regime. But a significant minority of Iranians, according to polls, especially people who would consider themselves to be more liberal, they have somewhat favorable views of the West, and some of them very favorable. And some of them are very critical of Iran, and some of them actually believe that the problems between Iran and the United States are Iran's fault. Iran is to blame for being too extreme, being too stubborn, not being willing to compromise. And what the Israelis did through this attack was that they destroyed that worldview.
Right.
Those Iranians who believed that the West was somehow serious about international law or human values, they saw that the United States, as Iran was negotiating, the United States was lying, that it was conspiring with the Israeli regime behind the scenes in order to carry out this blitzkrieg attack, and that when the attack was carried out, the entire West supported it, and that the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is dominated by the West, they controlled the board, basically, the board of governors. It also supported the attack by refusing to condemn strikes on the nuclear facilities, which hypothetically could have caused radioactive leaks and hypothetically could kill many people.
Right.
And this is the sort of thing that you're hearing everywhere. People everywhere are saying that the mood has changed, especially among these young Iranians who 3 years ago were involved in this sort of color revolution, riots and protests. A lot of those people have, their worldview has shattered. So I think that while they did material damage and they murdered people in this war, but the damage that they've done to themselves among that significant minority of Iranians, I think it's irreversible, and it was as I said earlier, it was a major miscalculation and a catastrophic mistake.
Yeah, and that's actually something that we're starting to realize on this side as well, is many assumed that, we had the Mahsa Amini situation happening not, too long ago, and you saw many Iranians standing behind that. Even until today, they have very legitimate concerns about, their government. But one thing I believe Israel miscalculated here and didn't realize is when it comes to issues of war and security, it's almost as though there's a uniting factor among people. And that happens because now we are all under attack. There's an external force that is threatening our national sovereignty, our rights as a nation. And that is bound to bring people together. They're bound to stand behind one another. And I think the natural question that comes out now is, now that this has happened and the Iranian people themselves have become targets of the Israeli regime, how do they now view the U.S. in terms of its negotiation process, something that Iran was, abiding by right before this event happened? How are Iranians now viewing whether or not they would like to pursue negotiations again with America?
I think it actually goes much further than that, and that the whole Mahsa Amini issue was not about Mahsa Amini. It was more about what I was saying earlier, and that is that a young generation of Iranians thought that Iran was the problem. Not the whole generation, but a significant portion of that younger generation. They thought that it was Iran that was the problem in the relationship with the United States and the West. Iran was stubborn. Iran was supporting different groups and causing trouble in the region and being hard-nosed or hard-headed about the nuclear program, and that if Iran had just smiled, and if Iran had been more flexible, then all of our problems with the West would be solved, and Iran would be like Switzerland, whatever Switzerland is. I don't know if it's really what they say it is, but in any case, that's the point. And so the demise of Mahsa Amini was simply an excuse, because later on the footage came out that she was not beaten and all that, or at least there's no evidence of it. But it was about something much bigger. And that color revolution, of course, was supported from abroad. And I had students who were involved, my own students, who were involved in the protests and the riots. But what happened was that, as I said, their whole worldview was shattered. When they saw that the United States and the Israelis and the Europeans were supporting aggression, when they saw that international institutions or international bodies like the UN Security Council were not there to protect Iranians, when they saw that the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is a global body, is supposed to be a global body, is really controlled by the West, their worldview changed completely.
Right.
So, and this is something, because we have to keep in mind that these young people, they did not experience the revolution. They did not see the U.S. supporting the Shah, helping him create a secret police, supporting him when his army gunned down people in the thousands on the streets. They did not see Saddam Hussein invade Iran. They did not see the chemical weapons. They were born after all this. And they were influenced by Persian media that's broadcast from the West, that's constantly antagonizing Iran. Many of them. I mean, I'm not saying all youth or even the majority, but a significant segment of young Iranians. And so what happened was that all those ideas that they had were shattered. And we saw how everyone rallied behind the armed forces, and the guards in particular, because they were the targets. And they rallied behind Ayatollah Khamenei. And so that, I think, is far greater than just people coming together because of some foreign enemy and attacking the country. This was, I think, a major shift in how a segment of society thinks about Iran. Of course, there's also another segment of society that is different, and they definitely think in a different way, but they say that, yes, we should rally to defend the country against foreigners or against a foreign enemy. But the large segment of young people that I'm referring to, the change that they have experienced, the things that they've seen over the past few weeks, have huge and long-term significance, and they'll have a huge impact in the future. And I think it's important also to look at it from another angle. The Americans and the Europeans, their think tanks, their elites, their governments have always been saying that for many years that Iran is a house of cards. Iran is very fragile. It is on the verge of collapse, people despite the so-called regime, and it's about to implode and all that. The Israeli regime, with the help of Western intelligence agencies, carried out this unprovoked blitzkrieg, and they murdered most of the senior commanders of the Revolutionary Guards. But what happened? Nothing. The country rallied behind the guards and the armed forces in general. So and this is something that we knew would happen if under such circumstances. But the whole project was to have Iran collapse. This was not about the nuclear program. It was a so-called regime change operation, as they call it.
Exactly.
It was to overthrow, because they thought that all they had to do is give it a push and everything falls. But in any case, what happened is going to have a huge impact on any future talks, because Iran never did trust the United States. Now the entire country doesn't trust the United States for reasons that I explained.
Right.
And I don't think that there's going to be any. It's almost impossible, really, to have a successful negotiations with the United States, because they are dishonest. They are conspiring, and they've murdered Iranians. They've helped the Israeli regime murder, and so have the Europeans. So I think that things are going to be different in future.
And one thing we know happened shortly following the reported ceasefire that's in place right now is that Iran suspended cooperation with the IAEA based on the agency's complicity in the Israeli attacks, especially with their falsified report on Iran violating the terms of the NPT. Under what circumstances, if at all, do you think Iran will return to the NPT? And is that something you see happening in the near future? Not return to the NPT. What I meant is it possible that they're going to resume cooperation with the IAEA?
Yes, Iran, of course, is not planning to leave the NPT,
Yeah.
but they're not going to allow the International Atomic Energy Agency to inspect anything in Iran anytime soon. And the law that the parliament passed has been written in a way where Iran has to feel completely, they have to feel secure
Right.
for them to let them in. And why in the world would Iran feel at ease with the presence of these people from the agency? They've been spying against us. They've been passing on intelligence about scientists to Western intelligence agencies about the nuclear program. They know that the program was peaceful. They have no evidence that it's ever been anything but peaceful. But the statement made by the head of the agency and the board of governors, which is dominated by the West, was basically to help justify aggression. That was the plan. The plan was to write something or say something hostile towards Iran so that the Israeli regime could attack, and Western media and Western elites and Western governments could support that. So they burnt the bridges, and that's their big loss. Iran now has a major card to play with, and they've given it to Iran to use as it wishes. We don't have to let them in anymore. We've blinded Western intelligence agencies. Now they would like to know many things, but they won't. They will seek information, but they won't get access to it. And whatever information they get will be very vague and very unclear. So they've shot themselves in the foot. The Iranians will definitely use this as a card to play with in the future, and
Right.
that's this, and this has enormous public support. Right now, a poll that I saw, I think last week, basically was showed that the Iranians didn't want to have anything to do with the International Atomic Energy Agency anymore.
The public opinion is also in that direction as well.
That's right.
And so one thing we do know, though, however, is Iran obviously still remains a signatory to the NPT. And that's something we know that Israel has refused to do until now. Do you think there's any scenario where Iran would leave the NPT and potentially, obviously we know they have said they have no intention to pursue a nuclear weapon, but given everything that has happened recently in the attacks against them, do you think it's possible that they would leave the NPT and potentially pursue a nuclear weapon given what has unfolded now?
That is something that is possible. That is a scenario that you could imagine. I'm not saying that's going to happen,
Right.
but there are circumstances where I could imagine Iran taking those steps, and all of them would be due to the aggressive and murderous policies pursued by the United States, by the Europeans, and by the Israeli regime. We have to keep in mind that Iran signed a nuclear deal in 2015, as you know, and
Right.
they allowed for intrusive inspections by IAEA inspectors that were unprecedented in the world. In other words, they had huge access in Iran, and their inspectors spent more time in Iran than anywhere else in the world, by far. So it was Trump that tore up that deal. It wasn't necessarily an excellent deal. Many in Iran said we gave too much, but that's
Right.
not the point. The point is that Trump tore up that deal himself. So he basically pushed Iran towards building up its peaceful nuclear program, building greater infrastructure, becoming more technologically advanced in the fields of nuclear energy. Iran is today probably among the 10 most advanced countries in nuclear energy. So he pushed us in that direction by tearing up the deal. And then by carrying out this murderous assault, Trump and Netanyahu and the Europeans, what they did was they forced Iran to stop cooperating with the
Cooperation.
International Atomic Agency about NPT regulations or about regulations that are linked to the organization. So Iran they will no longer have access because of Trump. So Trump tore up the deal. Iran moved ahead with his program. Now Trump carried out a murderous assault, and Iran said, okay, then we're not cooperating anymore. So if anyone is to complain about where the situation is going, potentially, hypothetically, it's Trump.
Right. And, in this line, do you see that, obviously we have seen Israel violate the ceasefire with Gaza, so it's nothing new. Do you think that it is possible in the near future for Israel to resume attacks on Iran? And in such a scenario, would you say Iran is prepared to go full force again and potentially even, continue it longer than we have seen until now?
Yes, I think that if the Israeli regime attacks Iran again, this time Iran will be hitting much harder, and it will be much more painful for the regime. And the regime will have to accept it because the world will all agree, except for the West, which supports the Holocaust in Gaza. They support the daily violations of the ceasefire against Lebanon. The Israeli regime is murdering people in the West Bank regularly, in Lebanon regularly, in Gaza. They're carrying out a genocide. They violated all the ceasefire in Gaza. They violated the ceasefire with Lebanon. So Iran obviously is preparing itself for another round. But if there is a second round, which is highly likely, then I think that the Israelis are going to see a more, how should I put it, a more
Intense?
I don't want to say it in a negative way for Iran, but it will be much more painful.
I see. And this is a conversation I had with Mr. Ritter not too long ago, and his prediction was there is the potential for this war to escalate to the level of nuclear warfare. And in specific, he said it's possible that the U.S., if they, obviously getting involved behind Israel, would potentially use a nuclear bomb against Iran if it comes to it. Do you think that's an actual possibility in this scenario?
Well, I disagree with Scott on this issue, and I think that even talking about this tells us how disgusting the United States is, how disgusting the regime in Washington is, that anyone could even contemplate the United States using nuclear weapons against another country. That just shows how corrupt and criminal the regime is. But I don't think it would end well for the United States at all. The world would revolt against the United States. This is a red line. This is the ultimate red line.
Absolutely.
And this is not just about a war. This is something that will, people across Latin America, across Asia, across Africa, they will see the world in a very different light under such circumstances. Nuclear weapon is not something that you can just use and slaughter people with and get away with it in today's world. It will have implications that I think will just be, it will have horrific effects for the United States itself. The world, as I said, they will turn against the United States. But in any case, Iran is not going to be, it's not going to give up its sovereignty or its rights because the United States threatens it. If that was the case, then all the countries across the world will have to become obedient to the United States because they are madmen in charge there. So, I find that highly unlikely, but Iran is not going to sacrifice its sovereignty because some people believe that the United States is that crazy.
Right. And one thing we do know as well that has come from Trump's, own mouth is he said the U.S. would, quote unquote, absolutely bomb Iran again if intelligence indicated that Iran was once again pursuing high-level enrichment. And what we're seeing coming from Iran again is that no, as we have stated from before, we do reserve the right for our sovereignty and for our national benefit, like any other country has the right to enrich uranium, even at high levels. Do you think that America's position in any way will affect Iran's, decision making regarding high level enrichment whatsoever.
No, Iran will continue what it wants to do, and Iran has actually, as we discussed earlier, they've already responded to Trump. They said we're not cooperating with the International Atomic Energy Agency, and they've left Iran now.
Right.
Their experts have left the country. So if Trump is if he thinks he's so powerful and that he can intimidate Iran, I think he should look at the fact that these inspectors have left. They didn't take a flight; they had to leave and go to a neighboring country by car. But all he has to do is go and take a look at the status of the International Atomic Energy Agency in Tehran today, and he'll understand that the Iranians are not impressed.
Right. And one other point that I think is important to bring in, very interesting, especially as people from the outside who are watching all of this unfold, we saw a very interesting, or actually maybe the proper word is embarrassing, level of silence coming from the Persian Gulf states. A lot of them who had, by voice given support for, causes like Palestine, even Iran, some of them said, this is not something that should happen. We condemn this, we condemn that. But many of them were actually aiding Israel, whether it was through, air defenses or just providing their, airspaces for them in terms of refueling and things like that. Now, as an Iranian yourself, you have also fought during the Iran-Iraq war. You have seen what it looks like for a country to be alone in every aspect and still decide to fight full force. Do you believe that Iran can do this alone again, especially if things were to escalate and it would become a full-out war, which is a prediction many have? Do you think that this is going to be something Iran is willing to do, knowing that it will probably not have support once again?
Well, first of all, it's clear as day that none of these countries, or none of these regimes, let's say, they have any real intention to support the Palestinian people. And it's not just the Persian Gulf.
Right.
Erdogan has no intention to help the Palestinian people. He continues to transport oil from Baku, and the Aliyev regime in Baku is a close ally of Israel, and Erdogan is a close ally of him. So, they're all allies. Netanyahu, you look at it from that perspective, the rhetoric aside, if you look at the reality on the ground, Turkish government is an ally of Israel.
Absolutely.
Because during this Holocaust, they've been providing the fuel, carry out the Holocaust for the whole 21 months. And so is the regime in Azerbaijan. And of course, the same is true with Qatar. We saw when Bannon was saying, and this is a clip people should look at, when Bannon was saying that the Israeli regime was saved by Trump during the war. After that, he spoke about Qatar, and he said that Qatar has become really close to the United States in dealing with what he called Islamic terrorists and Hamas. So we shouldn't look at a TV show or some Al Jazeera Arabic or Al Jazeera English, which is very ambivalent, as the reality. If the Americans wanted Al Jazeera to be shut down, the regime in Doha would do it within minutes. It would be finished.
Right.
So there's no doubt about where they stand. Their hearts may be with us, but their swords are with the Americans. That's the point. The radar bases in Incirlik or in Doha or in Manama or in Abu Dhabi, or all of them are being used to help the Israeli regime, both offensively and defensively. The airspace of Jordan use
Syria now as well,
with permission. Syria, well, the regime in Israel is an ISIS, Al Qaeda regime, which is, their obedience to the West. That's why they removed the sanctions. This is what we knew. What was the plan was since 2011, but sadly, because of the sectarian propaganda of these pro-Western dictatorships in the region, NATO allies and so on, a lot of people were fooled by the propaganda. And now we see what, everyone sees what we knew was going to happen. That was the objective. So Syria is moving towards the Israeli regime, like everyone else. But I think that the situation, first of all, as you pointed out, in the 1980s, Iran was very much alone, but it was steadfast, and Saddam failed. But this is different than the 1980s. First of all, Iran, the axis of resistance, they're much stronger than back. Second of all, there has been a global awakening. In the 1980s, people got their information from Western media, and the world was basically seen through Western eyes, except for Soviet country or pro-Soviet Union. But much of the rest of the world, they got their information from the West, from Reuters or Western newspapers. Of course, we lived in a different world back then. Today, people see what's going on in Palestine. They see that the only country that is, or the only groups that are willing to sacrifice for the Palestinian people are the axis of resistance. Whether Hezbollah, which gave sacrifices for the people of Gaza, so many sacrifices, is incredible. Or Yemen, or the Iranians. People see that. And across the global south, sympathies lie with Iran. It's clear as day. And even in the West, despite the fact that in the United States, for example, people are the most propagandized anywhere compared to anywhere else in the world. But even there, we see that the mood has changed dramatically against the Israeli regime. We see young Jews protesting against the war just, I think, yesterday or the day before. We saw at MIT a young Hindu woman protesting despite the fact that she knew she'd be punished. She spoke out against the regime in her speech, despite the fact that she knew she'd have to face consequences. People across the United States, their eyes have been opened, and young people in particular. So I think that it's very clear that where the hearts and minds of people lie right now. People across the world, they've heard Iran demonized for 4.5 decades, whether through Western narratives or by the extremely sectarian narratives and racist narratives produced by these oil and gas-rich dictatorships who are in the Western camp. They do it at the behest of the West. But now all those narratives have shattered because people have seen that the real resistance to Zionism, to ethno-supremacism, to ethnic cleansing is the resistance, the axis of resistance, which is led by Iran. And even during this war, we saw Iran was very steadfast, and Iran's position on Palestine has not budged. And so I'm optimistic. I don't think we have, it's going to be wonderful. We are going to have wonderful days and weeks ahead. I think that, what the United States, the sinister regimes that support the Israeli genocide, and those countries in the region that are assisting them, they will continue to create horrors in Gaza. But I think that this ultimately will come to an end, and it will not be favorable to those who are in the camp of the United States and Zionism.
And to close the conversation, one thing that I wanted to discuss with you, I know we are now in the month of Muharam, which is the first month of the Islamic calendar, and the significant event that occurs in Muharram, specifically Ashura, is the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, the Prophet's grandson, and his family, who fought against the tyrants of their time, Yazid in specific, who was a corrupt leader and essentially preserved Islam for generations to come. One thing that I want to ask you, I know you tweeted, and this is while the 12-day war was going on, you said, "We are the nation of Imam Hussein." And I want to ask you, what did you mean by that statement?
Well, if your viewers know anything about Islam, or if your viewers know anything, if your viewers are interested in Islam and they know some things about Islam, then they would know that the Prophet has his household was very dear to him, and his grandson, Imam Hussein, he stood up against the tyrant of his era at the request of the people who called on him to lead them. And now what those people actually did when the things became difficult, remember you're actually, when they say their hearts are with you, but their swords are against you, it goes back to that event.
Right.
And so when Imam Hussein went to Karbala to defend these people, they were too cowardly to join him. And in fact, they were pushed to join the despot against him. And when the despot of that time, Yazid, his henchmen gave Imam Hussein ibn Ali, the choice of submitting or death, he refused to submit. He said, "Hayhat min nadillah," that we reject humiliation, never to humiliation. And he and all of his companions were martyred. And so, and then his sister, Zainab, who was also the granddaughter of the Prophet, obviously, she was captured along with the family of the Imam and his companions. But while they were being held by the enemy, she continues to raise her voice and raise awareness, and she basically explained to the people what had happened, and she turned public opinion wherever she went. She turned public opinion against the despot. So
Right.
this sister and brother in Iran, they are celebrated. And on Tasua and Ashura, which tomorrow is Tasua in our calendar, and the day after the Ashura, on these 2 days, people participate in ceremonies commemorating their sacrifice and their steadfastness and what they did. And this chapter in history is very much a part of Iranian ideology and Iranian culture and Iranian society. Even the most secular of people, regardless of how you may define what secularism means, because it means different things to different people.
Right.
But when it comes to Ashura, you see that almost everyone participates in it in one form or another. And that has created a resilience and a steadfastness among Iranians, among the Lebanese, among the resistance in general. That is the backbone, the ideological backbone of the resistance and the axis of resistance. And that is why that despite all the odds, the resistance has been able to score so many successes, and why the resistance has been willing to make so many sacrifices for the people of Palestine, because the people of Palestine are the abused, they are the oppressed, they are the marginalized, and they are being subjugated by racist and ethno-supremacist monsters who consider them and everyone else to be subhuman and consider themselves to be some sort of master people. And so this steadfastness is to support those who are under subjugation. And this is something that in the West people don't comprehend. I think the power of the axis of resistance, much of it lies in this chapter of history that took place in the land of Karbala on the 10th of Muharam, on the day which we call Ashura.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for joining us on this interview. Very, I think, meaningful ending to our conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
If you like what you see here at TMJ News, please like and share and subscribe to our channel for more weekly content. TMJ is a grassroots independent media outlet, and you can find ways to support us by reading the caption below. Thank you for joining us on this episode, and we look forward to seeing you next time.